So, okay, let me just review these notes because these are notes that came up, and I want to see if I've touched on all the things. So, I did touch on that engagement with joy and attitude before anything really are about gradually increasing our dog's arousal levels with the ocean principles so that we can work with our dogs. And, you know, I touched on this before, but we don't want to control the dog. We want the dogs to have choice. And it's really easy to give the dogs choice if we have nothing at stake. So the reason it's better to train this stuff away from something that we care about the result is because we will be willing to give our dog a choice. So let's say our dog, you know, we're increasing our dog's arousal, and they, you know, instead of sticking the mark, they pop off the mark. Well, the natural tendency, if we care about the result, if there's a reason that we need that dog to stick that mark, we're going to help them. We're going to be like, we're going to give them a hand motion that's going to say, you know, get back on that mark. If we are there to, you know, let our dogs have choice and let them learn on their own and let them, you know, use their natural intelligence, then we're going to let the dog, you know, miss the mark. We're going to give the dog a choice that can step back up, which tells us the dog knows the behavior but did a little whoopsie, which is completely normal. When you're adding speed and distance to a mark, the dogs need to learn how to stick the landing. And as dog trainers, we want to like be helicopter moms. We want to be like, here's exactly how you're going to do it. We're going to teach you how to do it. We're going to be right in there. We're going to be right next to you. We're going to put our hand right in front of your face to help you. Well, I would say the more productive way to train a dog to understand how to stick a landing on a mark bucket, which is advantageous, contacts, everything, is to let the dog learn through its own natural consequences, which is the mark buckets flipping over or having, you know, having to step back on, all of that. So again, we're training away from stuff that we have an agenda for so that we can be better observers and connectors with compassion. We want our dogs to be empowered. We want them to figure out, you know, their own solutions to problems. We want them to figure out the best way to stop. And if a dog isn't getting it, then yeah, we're going to help them. Like, it's, hey buddy, it's like, use your rear to stop. Don't try to bang your front in. So, but at first, you give them a lot of opportunities to figure it out on their own. Because if they figure it out on their own, they remember. It's just like if you're doing, you know, a really complex challenge of any type, and somebody just, you know, jumps in, they say, oh, here's the solution. Oh, and you go, thanks, and the solution. Then, oh, the perfect example is a computer problem, right? Somebody goes, you know, enter Control Alt Delete and hold the shift and then hit Z, and then poof, your problem solved. And then the next time you have that problem, you're like, now, how did I solve that? And you're going to call your friend. You're going to be helpless, right? Please help me. But if you thought, you know, I've got this computer problem, I've got to Google it, and then you Google it and you find all the stuff, and you finally, you know, figure it out, and then you take a note because you know you're going to forget this. When it happens again, you can solve your own problem because you solved it the first time. So it's a natural tendency for us to want to step in and help because we want our dogs to be successful, but it's less of a temptation when we're doing something that we don't have an agenda about, and that's, you know, everything we're doing in Ocean. It has great ramifications in other training realms, but in itself, there's nothing that we can necessarily gain that we would fear losing. Somewhat. It's not all or nothing, but you know, I think you get my drift. So let's see. The other thing about, that quote, and it's come up, and I think it's worth reminding you, because I have it as a weekly reminder. Do what you can with what you have where you are. And the reason I remind myself of this weekly is resourcefulness and creativity, what they call it a little c. So it's not creative output, it's not artistry or music, it's like creative thinking. That you're more likely to be creative if you're working within constraints. And an example of that is I've never had access to a training field or contacts until I started teaching at Marin Humane a year ago. So I did all of my running contact training with a 12-foot board on the back porch of this Woodstock house. And I just made do. I have a little 3 by 3 foot yellow board that I leaned up against my coffee table so I could do 2 on 2 off training in the winter. I mean, I did all sorts of creative things. And Lil has the most, amazing, consistent, happy contacts. So with Dakota, when I decided to switch him to running contacts because I was doing all these venues and it's 5-foot A-frames, 5'6", and there are all these things that made his old performance not work anymore. I thought, well, I have access to these contacts, so I'm going to go ahead and retrain this running contact. And I did it the way everybody does it, which is you keep running your dog over the contact using props, and the dog develops a striding pattern, they do it. Well, the only reason I was willing to do this with him is because his natural running A-frame was 2 feet high hits in the yellow. And my thought was, if I do a terrible job of training, what came naturally is going to come back. And I'll have legal A-frame. And incidentally, I do think a lot of people who think they have successful training methods comes from that most dogs, just have a way of doing it that, especially border collie sized dogs, that is 2 feet high in the contact, and they do it without any training. Anyway, so here I am a year later. I take away the props, and what do I have? I have exactly what I had to start with. And it just drove home that, granted, I was trying to train using this method that many people use, and I could do because I had access to an A-frame. And it might have worked if I only had the exact same A-frame specifications that I ran him over. But anyway, the aha I had was, if I want to train him to be able to perform the A-frame on any A-frame, which could be an 8-foot A-frame in NADAC, which is in 4 feet 8 inches high, or it could be a 9-foot A-frame 5 feet high, or it would be a 9-foot slatted A-frame 5.5 feet 6 inches high. If I expect him to be able to do all of those things, it's going to have to be intentional. He's going to have to target something that says, no matter what the experience is going over this A-frame, that there's this thing at the bottom that you need to hit. And how am I going to do that? It's away from the A-frame. So I've been doing mat running, which is something that we're going to talk about in the Never Stop Learning and on. That mat targeting has so many benefits. It's amazing. So anyway, so I refreshed his mat targeting and ran him over the A-frame, this week in class and after class, and his A-frame was better than it was after a year of this other training on an A-frame. So it was really a lesson to myself about the thing I've done in art all these years, which has been operating within constraints, which, like, thread spools only come in X number of colors. Thread spools are a certain size. So if I want to create a photorealistic image, I need X number of pixels, which then dictates how big the piece is. And I found it really easy to be creative within these tight constraints. And a lot of artists, like, take Monet with all the dots and stuff, those were constraints that, I think he limited himself to very limited palettes. And the creativity that it comes out of these constraints is innovation, and it's phenomenal. So the same can be true with dog training. Is, instead of training the obstacle, like, really get down to these basic, what is it the dog needs to learn? What does the dog need to understand? What is the mental, the thinking part of the dog? And then you work on that, and then you bring it to agility. So let's go back to the start line. So what does my dog need to learn at the start line? Well, my dog needs to learn that that stay means stay, even though I'm going to do exactly, variations. I'm going to lead out. I'm always going to release. I'm probably always going to jerk my hand when I release, unless I've really worked hard at not mixing, like not combining my hand motion and the release word, or looking over my shoulder and the release word, or a pause and a release word, which we humans like to do things at the same time. So unless you're super, super conscious that your verbal release is not timed with anything else, really what your dog is releasing on is this other thing. So where am I going to work on a start line? I'm not going to work on it at the start line. I'm not going to work at the start line in practice either. I'm going to work on proofing handler motion. I'm going to work on independence of all positions. I might work on stay means stay even when I leave. Train like a search and rescue down stay for 5 minutes. I'm going to train all this stuff that is loosely related to the mental and emotional state a dog needs to have at the start line. And the start line behavior you get for free having done all those other things. So again, and this is stuff you can do at home. You can put your dog in a down stay instead of a sit. I think it's maybe easier. And you leave the room. And you can, if you do it on floor, you can hear if your dog gets up. But you time yourself, 5 seconds, you come back in, you give your dog a reward, you do something else, you put them in down stay, you leave. Maybe if your dog is pretty advanced, you do maybe 45 seconds, you come back in, you reward your dog, blah, blah, blah. You keep doing this until you're now up to 9 minutes, and then sometimes 2 minutes, and then sometimes this and that and the other thing. So now your dog is going, down means down, wherever she is. And if you've got a dog that can remember down when you're not even there, you've got a dog that really understands, really staying more than down. The dog is understanding I'm supposed to stay put until I'm released. So that's where I would work on that start line. And I would also work on the start line in all those little ways that my dog is anticipating what's coming next. And this is huge. I don't know if it really, struck you as huge, but, Lil and Jake racing down the hall in the morning, while it was a safety issue because they didn't have rugs yet, it was also a very smart training issue, because that anticipation of the person always does this and then I always do this, these get linked together and they turn into these behavior chains that we are part of. So if we don't want our dogs to put together that, she puts me in a sit stay, or she puts me in a down stay, and then she leads out, and then she looks over her shoulder, and as soon as she looks over her shoulder, she's about to say, and now the dog's going to just take off. So being aware of all the ways that you're doing that dance with your dog in your life, and you become conscious and you break yourself out of those behavioral chains, then your start line is fixed. And if all of this sounds like, oh my God, such drudgery, it actually isn't, because dogs are just responding to what we've done, what the behavior is, what rewards the behavior has brought in the past. And as soon as that behavior isn't being rewarded and something else is being rewarded, the dog goes, okay, now we're going to do this. They don't have this attachment to running down the hall in the morning. They have the attachment to what came afterwards. So you offer something different and better, and the dog goes, okay, now we're doing this. So these are not these huge, drudgery training projects that they seem like in our minds when we think about changing something our dogs have been doing. And, the other thing too, and this came up in one of the conversations in the group, that a lot of the things we think are happening, when you really get in there to observe, they're not happening the way you think they're happening. And like, for instance, there was, a dog that was described as going so wacky about food that couldn't even work around food, that just, even like, dinner bowl, blah, 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 it could be risky to even, do anything with food. But then when, the actual, like, we'll do a test, try to feed your dog before putting the food bowl down. None of that happened. So is it because it never happened, or because the mind shift of the person was conscious and the dog recognized, oh, she's connecting with me, versus just doing this mindless feeding? Regardless, what was expected to happen didn't happen. So I think there's also a lot to be said about being present and allowing ourselves to see truly what's happening. You know, there's a part of our brains that, you know, it's a survival part that, like, if you see, you know, in dark shadows, you're more likely to project like something scary in there than you are, you know, abstract art. And the reason, you know, that's an old part of the brain that's always scanning for threats. So you might see, you know, two eyes and like a guy lurking in the shadows, when in fact it's just a garbage can and, you know, some shiny objects. But it's a survival thing, but it really is showing how our brains are projecting out what they think is out there. And the same is true with our dogs, that, you know, I subbed a couple of beginner or early agility classes. And it was really interesting to work with the students, and what they thought their dogs would do, what they thought their dogs could do, and what their dogs did were very different. And until you can observe your dog, until you know where you're starting, there's nowhere to go. But if you know where you're starting, then the sky's the limit. So if any of this like all sounds like, oh, so complex, so you know, conceptual, all that, the 5 principles of Ocean are the most simple principles you could ask for. And the reason they result in such astonishing outcomes is because they help us get rid of all this clutter and all this dog training. You know, that like dog training can get you into the mess you're in, but it can't always get you out of the mess. So it's like, take away everything we know, and then we're going to gradually add stuff back, keep the stuff that works, leave the stuff out that doesn't work, and you're going to end up with a much simpler experience training your dog. I mean, when I train my dogs, I'm looking at happiness. And my dogs, the one thing they've all had, even Crazy Jake, was extreme happiness, with the exception of when I tried to control Jake to get him to not be Jake. And then he was suppressed and not sparkly, not happy. But I have 3 incredibly happy dogs, because that is what I focus mainly on. And all this other stuff just kind of rolls in, you know, like with not much effort, because they're showing me everything. They're showing me what they know and what they don't know, and it's up to me to figure out how to help them understand what they don't understand. So I'm going to go back to this running over a mat thing with Dakota, because this is current. And by the way, I'm always training something new, and there's perhaps, you know, not an immediate outcome, but because I do believe that language, this you know, language forms when we have two-way communication with our dogs. And the way we communicate is through training, because our dogs don't talk, they act. So I am always trying to come up with something new to communicate with my dogs about. So with Dakota, it's been super fun to take a dog that's done all this front foot targeting and to see if I can't get him to understand that this new thing is I want rear feet, 2 rear feet ideally, and 2 rear feet separated ideally. And you know, it is remarkable that how far he's come in just the last couple weeks in terms of understanding that I want rear feet, by creating scenarios where I'm getting rear feet and really marking that, and yet still saying, hey buddy, that was good when I get front feet. So, you know, I'm not kind of blowing his mind. I'm saying, yeah, that's good, but whoa, that's really good. So where was I going with this? Simple. These simple things. observing your dog, having your intention being on what experience do you want to have for yourself, what experience do you want your dog to have, and I assume it's going to be happiness and relaxation and all of that, like fun. The other stuff just happens. Versus if you approach it where I need to train this behavior, then your whole training vibe is going to be like, okay, what do I need to do to get my dog to do that? And it's all going to be focused on doing versus being. So this is really about being a human being versus a human doing, and which is can be challenging because our society is so focused on, accomplishments, goals, doing this, doing that.